Well, Mr. Speaker, another Liberal speech from the throne, another speech full of recycled Liberal promises with grand gestures and lofty visions, but with no real plan to deal with the pandemic, no real plan to deal with the urgent healthcare needs of the provinces, no real plan to deal with lack of jobs, no real plan to deal with Canadian unity issues and Western alienation. Mr. Speaker, no plan to deal with the economy. The Liberal speech from the throne is full of the same old promises and recycled ideas that we have all been hearing about for years and years and years. And many of these promises have been unfulfilled, and they leave countless people behind. I'm talking about people like the single mom from Burlington who has to choose between staying home with her sick kids or picking up another shift at the local subway to pay the rent. I'm talking about the fish harvester out east who isn't sure how they're going to afford their next season. I'm talking about the producer in Brandon, Manitoba, burdened by the carbon tax and worried about trade wars keeping their goods from market. I'm talking about the dad in Hinton, Alberta, who doesn't know what he's going to do when the bank's mortgage deferral program comes to an end. I'm talking about the family in Cantley, Quebec, who's trying to get their minivan to last through just one more winter, and they can't afford an electric car. And I'm talking about the people who drive a Ford 150, like thousands of Canadians, and they're tired of being insulted by Liberal elites.
Here, here.
And I'm talking about the family in Yukon who run a fly-in guide outfitting business, and they rely almost entirely on international tourism. These are the people, Mr. Speaker, that Conservatives are standing up for. These are the people that we know have been left behind in this Liberal speech from the throne. Now, let's just make sure that it's clear. The Prime Minister shut down Parliament. He prorogued Parliament. He shut down committees. He stopped everything dead in its tracks when he was being exposed for his scandal. Why? Because he said he was going to present a speech from the throne that would give Canadians a plan. It did none of that. It's clear, Mr. Speaker, the only reason he prorogued Parliament was to cover up and distract from his own scandal. So it's also very disturbing that there is no plan to deal with this pandemic. When our leader spoke with the Prime Minister last week, he asked the Prime Minister to ensure that Canadians had better and faster access to COVID testing options. This is vitally important right now, Mr. Speaker, that there are options for Canadians to get tested for COVID and to get the results back in a timely manner. It is unacceptable that we trust countries such as Japan, Germany, and the US with our national security intelligence, but we don't trust their approval of 15-minute saliva tests. Just last March, the Prime Minister promised that rapid testing for Canadians would be his top priority. Half a year and $500 billion later, and Canadian families are still waiting in line for hours, sometimes for days, for tests, let alone for those results. Because, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has failed to deliver. Maybe the wealthy, well-connected friends of the Liberal elite can afford to stay quarantined. Maybe they can afford to wait, but hardworking Canadians cannot afford to take weeks off to quarantine if they come up in a contact tracing list. They deserve a plan, and they deserve to have some hope. Mr. Speaker, there is no commitment to increase health transfers, which was the province's top ask. Instead of giving the provinces the resources they need to fight the pandemic, the Liberals are once again interfering in provincial jurisdiction. Last week, on behalf of the Premiers Kenney, Pallister, Ford, and Legault were here in Ottawa, presenting a united front, asking the federal government to do the right thing and provide appropriate healthcare funding to the provinces with no strings attached. Because contrary to what the Prime Minister thinks, who believes Ottawa knows best, it is the provinces who are best placed to deal with issues that fall within provincial jurisdiction. Last week, to highlight the extent of the healthcare funding problem, my Premier, the Premier of Manitoba, Premier Pallister, explained it this way. He said, "Never has there been a higher demand for healthcare. Never have federal contributions to healthcare been so low. And because of this, never have wait times been so long." And this was before the pandemic even started. Now, with the second wave of the pandemic upon us, people are hurting and sometimes even dying because the federal government isn't giving the provinces the healthcare funding they need to look after their people. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, the Canadian Medical Association had this to say about the failure of this Liberal Prime Minister's speech from the throne, and I quote, "Today's speech falls short of delivering on the promises of ensuring a resilient healthcare system and keeping Canadians healthy." The top issue we are dealing with today, Mr. Speaker, is a health crisis, and the Liberals have failed to address it in this speech from the throne. It is absolutely unacceptable. Now, while I could go on the issue of health care, I know that my colleague, the Honourable Member for Calgary-Nose Hill, and our Shadow Minister for Health will have a lot more to say during this debate and during the days and weeks ahead. I want to close my remarks today with a very important issue. And I understand that possibly for some who are here in the East, it may not be something that's top of mind. For those who live in Ontario, Quebec, maybe Atlantic provinces, I fully understand, and I can see why they don't think of this as top of mind, and I wish the Prime Minister would help to bring it to the forefront, and that is the issue of unity. The issue of unity in this country and the issue of Western provinces, of which I come from one Western province, feeling alienated by this Prime Minister and by this government. The Prime Minister likes to say that we are stronger when we are united and we are all in this together. And yet our country is more divided than ever. Our Conservative leader made it clear during his first call with the Prime Minister that if the Prime Minister was serious, he must make addressing national unity concerns and Western alienation a priority. And yet, not a single thing in the throne speech to even acknowledge that there is a problem. Our government needs to show Canadians that it values and respects all of them and their contributions to this country. This respect starts with an understanding that various resource revenues in each of the regions of our country help to build our roads and our hospitals and our infrastructure in other parts of the country, not just in the provinces where the resources are found. The lack of respect by the Prime Minister for our natural resources industries is unacceptable, because the various natural resources industries form the backbone of our economy. In the words of Alberta Premier Jason Kenney, and I quote, he said, in a 6,783-word throne speech, not one word recognized the crisis facing Canada's largest industry, the energy sector, supporting 800,000 jobs. Instead, we got a litany of policies to strangle investment, jeopardize resource jobs, when we need an industry generating 20% of government revenues, unquote. Mr. Speaker, to highlight the failure of the Liberal government to deal with the issues facing Alberta, Premier Kenney went on to say, Alberta is disappointed that instead of listening to Canada's provinces, the federal government doubled down on policies that will kill jobs, make Canada poorer, and weaken national unity. In fact, agriculture, forestry, and energy resources, Mr. Speaker, were not mentioned once in this speech. This is completely unacceptable, given that we found out yesterday that Canada recorded its largest ever drop in natural resources unemployment in the second quarter. Mr. Speaker, under the leadership of our leader, the Honourable Member for Durham, Canadians can rest assured that we will hold the Prime Minister and the Liberal government to account. We will not support this speech from the throne, but we will put forward a plan that keeps Canadians safe, protects jobs, and gets our country back on track. Thank you very much.